A lot of these people have very strong views, and so you have pretty robust debates about some things.
So although the point may never have been explicitly made, wasn't it on occasion obvious to you what the conditions for their support amounted to?
I think one can overdo this. I think in the end, a lot of these newspapers follow their readers' views. When I felt what I was trying to do, and I think I say this in my evidence, was I was trying to win back to the Conservative cause newspapers that had been Conservative and had been won over by Tony Blair. And so I wasn't asking them to sign up to a whole set of views that they thought were completely ridiculous. I was just trying to get them to return to the right cause, as it were. And of course, you know, you have very robust conversations about policy areas where you don't agree.
In the example you've given, the Sun newspaper was won over to Mr. Blair, and therefore the preponderance of their readers' views were convergent with New Labour. So
at that stage, yes, I think that's my point. Is that, you know, at the end of, towards 1997, the Conservative government obviously had fallen massively out of favour. Sun readers were anyway switching to Labour, and their decision, while a big blow for the Conservatives, you can see a sort of natural. That was what was happening. And I think under my leadership of the Conservative Party, steadily, Sun readers were coming over to the Conservative Party. And I felt, in talking to a lot of Sun journalists, a lot of them were very keen for their newspaper to change its stance because they felt they were out of tune with their readers. So I think one can overdo the whole. Also, I'm not. No way does winning the support of this newspaper or that newspaper guarantee you an election victory. Their circulations, if anything, are getting smaller.
Well, I think we can all agree that the point has been, its importance has been over-exaggerated, but there's still some degree of significance to be attached, in particular to the Sun's support. I think we can agree on that issue. Can I go back to 2005, Mr. Camoron? Of course, you started as leader of the opposition, I think, in December of that year, if my memory is right. Was your strategy then, as your then Press Secretary George Eustace has said, to create distance between yourself and Mr. Murdoch?
I wouldn't put it like that. I mean, I'd won the leadership of the Conservative Party without the support of, I think, any newspapers, frankly. I had a pretty rocky time with them during the leadership election, and I think I'd won the leadership basically through what I'd said at Conservative Party conference, and it was television that had helped me to get my message across. I wanted us to have a good relationship with newspapers. I knew we needed to win over more support, but to start with, there were certainly some in my office who were very keen on trying to do things completely differently and communicate much more through the internet and what have you. I would say I was more cautious about that, thinking we wanted to work very hard on television. We should do what we could with the newspapers, but I think that's the way it was. It wasn't quite sort of one set of circumstances after 2005 and then another set later on.
Well, Mr. Eustace has said, and I just invite you to comment on this, that when I was his press secretary, we pursued a strategy of quietly puncturing the arrogance of both editors and proprietors and raising the status of what I term real journalism. Is that a fair analysis in your view or not?
I think that the parts of it are right, in that we did want to have this. We didn't want to go down the same route as everything Labour had done. We did want to have a bit more distance. But if you look at the record of the sort of meetings I was having and the rest of it, I was still, flying off to meet proprietors and trying to win people over. So I don't think it totally squares up that there was one approach that was tried and failed and then another approach. I think there's slightly more elision between the two, my reflection on it.
You also made a point that you wouldn't have flown halfway around the world, if I can put it in those terms, to speak at News Corporation's annual conference. Would that have been an accurate assessment of your thinking in 2005?
Well, I certainly wasn't invited, but I mean, I was checking the record, actually, for this, because I saw what George Eustace did a brilliant job working for me. I saw what he wrote. But looking at the record of the meetings I had and the amount of activity we were doing trying to win over and win support of newspapers, including, I think, actually flying off to meet the owners of the Telegraph, as I say, I don't think I would characterise it as one approach and then a different approach. I think there's slightly more similarity between the two. I think there's one other thing maybe to say, which was at the beginning of my leadership, a lot of what I was trying to do was make changes to the Conservative Party, to the policies of the party, the approach of the party. Not all of these were very popular with the Conservative press, so I had a difficulty in trying to make changes to the Conservative Party while at the same time convince the Conservative press I was doing the right thing.
But some have identified a change of tack, as it were, in around 2007, rightly or wrongly, and that flows from the fact that you didn't have widespread support in the media. It's fair to say in paragraph 196 of your statement that you say you didn't have widespread support at the time you became leader of the opposition.
Yes, yes.
But that may have continued until about 2007. Is that a reasonable analysis?
Yes, I think it is. I mean, some of that, as I say, was because I was making these changes to the Conservative Party. But also I did, I think, progressively realise over 2006, 2007, that it's very difficult if you're running a political party and you're trying to win over the public, you're trying to create momentum. It's quite difficult if you don't have what I would call sort of the different bits of the Conservative family behind you. You need your MPs supporting you, you need your MEPs, you need your councillors, your members, and you also need, those parts of the Conservative press that should be sort of getting behind you. And I had this situation where, some quite conservative parts of the press, I just wasn't really getting much backing from them, and I was frankly, I think I was sort of struggling a bit to get some of the message across. So I put in, I think I've put in a lot of work already, but maybe I'll put in some more work.
Your exhibit DC2, Mr. Cameron, which is under tab 3 of this bundle, this collects together the meetings you've had with media figures as leader of the opposition. You're not putting it forward as a certificate in the sense that you can't guarantee that every single meeting is here, and we understand. We understand that. For what it's worth, over 4 years and 5 months of opposition, we've counted 1,404 entries, which equates to around 26 meetings or interviews per month, which is more than one every weekday. It's fair to say that in government there have been fewer. It works out at about 13 a month, so it's 50% of the time you lavished on this in opposition.
Well, as I say, when I was elected, I did try to do less of this and try to have more of a distance, try to make sure that, because genuinely, when you're in opposition, what are you doing? You're campaigning, you're drawing up policies, you're trying to convince people. In government, it is and should be different. You should be spending your time governing, not talking about governing. So I did try to create some more distance. But as I explained earlier, I think it's very difficult because of these daily battles that you fight.
Well, do you think there's a problem, just if I interfere, as you're talking about the difference between opposition and government, you may be aware that Mr. Alistair Campbell made the point that he felt that the New Labour had made a mistake taking approaches adopted in opposition and running with them in government. Now, not everybody's agreed with that, but I'd be interested to know whether you think there is a difference, because whatever system one puts into place, it's quite difficult if it's not recognised as appropriate by both or all main parties.
I think it's right that in government you're making real decisions rather than just policy ideas and campaigns. So it's more important that what you do is done properly, and that's why you have special advisors codes, ministerial codes, and the rest of it. But I do think perhaps there is, when you're leader of the opposition, and I did the job for 5 years, it's only in the last year you get the sort of civil service machine starting to talk to you about how you translate your structure and your processes into number 10 Downing Street. And I think there could be a strength in, I don't believe in having a sort of official opposition office, as it were, but I think there could be a strength in having earlier discussions between the Cabinet Secretary or the Permanent Secretary at number 10 with a new leader of the opposition, just to make them aware of some of the processes and practices that might assist them in the work that they in the work that they do and avoiding any conflicts and the rest of it. So that is something perhaps we can write to your inquiry about.
Yes, that's very much along the lines that I was thinking about, that if practices develop that aren't appropriate for government, it might be better. I appreciate that opposition and government is very different for the reasons you've identified, but if good practice can be developed while in opposition, it will flow naturally into government. But if an opposition party are developing ideas without the experience of having been in government, it becomes much more difficult.
I'm sure that's right.
So I think that may be of value to try and deal, at least in part, with the issue.
Given the very significant amount of time devoted to media engagement, to what extent did those demands get in the way, you think, with policy formulation and leadership?
I don't think they were so extensive that you didn't have time to do the other things leaders of the opposition do. We had huge policy commissions that were starting from scratch, drawing up new policies. I had a very active programme of campaigning around the country. I did a huge number of what I call Camoron Directs, which were public meetings all over the country. So it takes up a lot of time, and there are moments when you think these are hours of your life you're not going to get back. But if you're a politician and you're leading a political party and you want to win people over, you need to get your message across.
In government, in particular, obviously you have a fuller day job. Does the same point apply? Do you feel that media engagement, less true it is in government than it has been in opposition, has intruded in policy formulation, leadership and governing?
Well, it shouldn't, but it can. I think the way I've explained the 24-hour news agenda, when I arrived in Downing Street, I did think that the setup was quite geared to 24-hour news. It felt too much like a newsroom, and that's what the press department should be like, but you've got to try and create a structure and a private office and a set of arrangements where you can think, take decisions, prepare for decisions properly, structure your day so you're not permanently in a sort of news warfare mode, if I can put it that way.
Okay, so but looking at this list, which of course extends over a number of pages and starts at 04198, we've pored over it and attempted to do all sorts of statistical analyses, but to confess, I've come to the conclusion that would be misleading, Mr. Cameron, for a number of reasons. So we're not going to bore you with those analyses. Just pick up a couple of points, though, that we've identified for Mr. Rupert Murdoch 10 entries, Mr. James Murdoch 15, and for Rebecca Brooks 19. In relation to her, does that cover all social interactions or not?
This is for the period when I was in opposition.
Yes.
What we did for this, I mean, the short answer is it might not, because what we did for this was go back over the diaries for all the time I was leader of the opposition, try and work out whether we had missed anything out, but it doesn't always include, I mean, for instance, at the weekend, my diary wouldn't cover my weekends necessarily, so there could be other meetings in there that I haven't identified. Going through some of your other participants' meetings, we found some that didn't tally with us and ours didn't. We've been through and we've tried to reconcile as much as possible, but inevitably you have some where, I mean, in government it's different because certainly in the office, you have a diary, I think John Major explained this, a diary of what you're meant to do that day and then a diary of what actually happened that day. So the government ones in the office, I'm pretty confident about. The opposition ones was our best attempt, but it may have gaps.
Well, we're going to leave it to others, if so advised, to do their own comparative analysis. I mean, we haven't missed the point that Mr. Murdoch's list doesn't quite match yours, but frankly, it's an arid comparison in our view. We're just going to leave it there.
Well, it's clearly a mistake to over-exaggerate the importance or accuracy of these documents. These are best efforts, in retrospect, from records which were never intended to provide a historically accurate account of what you were doing. So it would be a mistake to try and do that analysis. What you do is you create a picture, and the picture, it seems to me, is sufficient for the purposes of the inquiry.
Yeah.
Before we break, Mr. Cameron, may I just a light on one item, please? The 16th of August 2008, which is page 04220. We see dinner here with Elizabeth Murdoch, Rebecca Wade and Matthew Freud. Was that part of the Santorini visit, which we believe it to be?
I don't have the date of the Santorini visit on me, but it must be in my evidence somewhere. So if we cross-check, I'm sure we can find that out. It looks like it was.
Yes, it is.
Page 67 is my evidence.
Yeah, it is, Mr. Cameron. Paragraph 200.
Got it. Okay. Yes.
Can I just ask you, please? Mr. Rupert Murdoch wasn't at the dinner then. Is that correct?
No, I think he was at the dinner. I don't think this is. I'm extremely sorry. I don't think that is right. I think you've spotted an error, for which I'm very sorry.
But I'm not saying it's the biggest.
No,
point.
well, basically, it looks like. Yeah, well, I deal with it in my evidence because 199 200 201. Basically, this was my memory. Was that this was drinks and then a dinner, but I think the dinner was everyone who was there, including the people listed in DC 2. But I think Rupert Murdoch was there. Yes.
So is that a convenient moment?
Yes, certainly. Prime Minister, we have a break to give the shorthand writers
Very good.
a few minutes off.
Well, there, after an hour and 15 minutes, they break for a cup of tea. A rather measured, assured performance from David Cameron from the last hour or so. Just getting on at the tail there to meetings with the Murdochs and Rebecca Brooks whilst in opposition, but also he was asked about whether deals had been done, and he was also asked about the concentration of market share. Let's bring in Ross Hawkins for his perspective on what we've heard so far. What have you made of it, Ross?
Well, here we had a Prime Minister describing time in opposition, trying to win back those formerly Conservative newspapers who'd gone over to Tony Blair's side, talking about having journalists, some of whom had been friends for decades, sometimes because they were simply neighbours, admitting there were those personal relationships, but crucially, and like so many witnesses before him, saying there was not an explicit or an implicit deal that was done where support was traded for any sort of policy. This probably was the key exchange.
The closeness, which I've talked about, leads, I think, potentially to these risks. And I've enumerated the risks. And clearly those risks have the potential to do the public harm unless they're properly dealt with. Now, I think this is doable and achievable, and it needs to be done.
Is it possible to describe one of the risks in this way, that the relationship has become transactional, that although there may not be express deals, there are implied understandings or concordats, because each party well knows what the other wants?
I don't accept that. I think, first of all, on this idea of overt deals, this idea that somehow the Conservative Party and News International got together and said, you give us your support and we'll wave through this merger that, by the way, we didn't even know about at that stage. I think the idea of overt deals is nonsense, and you've heard that from lots of people in front of this inquiry. I also don't believe in this theory that there was sort of nod and a wink and some sort of covert agreement. Of course, I wanted to win over newspapers and other journalists, editors, proprietors, broadcasters. I worked very hard at that because I wanted to communicate what the Conservative Party and my leadership could bring to the country. I made those arguments, but I didn't do it on the basis of saying, or either overtly or covertly, your support will mean that I'll give you a better time on this policy or that policy.
Well, that That was the Prime Minister's answer about trade-offs. He also gave us a few glimpses on regulation of what he thought might work and what he thought would not.
Yes, he was clear that he had an idea whereby if a minister was talking to journalists and they raised a commercial matter, that should be referred to an official. He didn't see any prospect of regulating the distinction between fact and comment, about which some people have complained. A clear hint, he wasn't impressed by the idea of regulating further when it came to market size as well, how big newspapers should be allowed to get. And throughout, very mild, very calm, blaming not the journalists but the politicians for being too obsessed with the news, with that little ticker of information on 24-hour news, urging them to change more than the press. And right at the end, we got onto those meetings with the Murdochs, those meetings with Rebecca Brooks. They've already uncovered one clerical error, quite possibly, in that evidence. This is where it really gets intriguing.
All right, Ross, thanks very much. Well, they will resume in the next 5 or 10 minutes and pick up on that theme about those meetings with the Murdochs, with Rebecca Brooks in opposition. We'll return when they return here. For now, it's back to you there in the studio.
Thanks very much, Matthew. See you in a little while. The time right now, 23 minutes past 11. Good morning. We will just take a look at some of today's other main stories. And a review has found that more than half of all criminals ordered to wear an electronic tag break the terms of their curfew. The report by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Probation criticises the way that tagging is being used in England and Wales and says the rules governing curfews need to be better enforced.
Tagging is a way of keeping watch on offenders. But there are claims the system isn't working properly, and there are serious questions about the way electronic monitoring is being used by the courts. A report by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Probation says curfews were often unrelated to the offence, rarely part of a strategy to address offending behaviour, and enforcement thresholds fall well short of what people should expect.
Probation officers have expressed concern that some offenders who are high risk, including sex offenders, have not been tagged within the first 24 hours of the court order being imposed. And indeed, in many cases, it's been days and weeks have passed before the tag has been put on.
Here's how monitoring is supposed to work. A box containing a telephone is placed in the offender's home, and then they're fitted with a tag on their ankle. The box is then able to measure in what direction they travel. Go beyond a permitted point, like beyond the front door, and details of the violation will be sent to the monitoring company.
But there are probation officers very worried that they don't get told about breaches. One agreed to talk to me, although she asked to remain anonymous.
There will still be the odd time when you just don't get it, so you're not aware at all that the person's violating the tag. And the only time you do become aware is perhaps when they commit an offence in the middle of the night.
G4S and Serco, the companies which operate the system in England and Wales, insist they have a good record. But with the government planning to expand the use of tagging, the Chief Inspector of Probation says there does need to be a debate. Chris Buckler, BBC News.
2 men and a woman have been arrested in connection with suspected inappropriate payments to police and public officials. The 3, one of whom is a former prison officer, were arrested this morning as part of Operation Elvedon, Scotland Yard's inquiry into payments to public officials. They're being questioned at police stations in Northamptonshire and London. A total of 33 people have been arrested since that operation got underway. A British soldier from the 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards has been killed in Afghanistan. The soldier, who hasn't yet been named, was part of a patrol that was trying to disrupt insurgent activity in Helmand province. His family has been told. 26 minutes past 11. Quite a lot happening in the world of sports. Let's get a full roundup from Jenny Culshaw. Morning, Jenny.
Good morning, Jane. Thank you very much. Harry Redknapp says he believes he'd still have been sacked by Spurs even if they'd have qualified for the Champions League. The club announced his sacking on their website in the early hours of this morning. Redknapp had been manager at the club for 4 years.
You know, the people who own the club, and they make decisions, and they have to make what decisions they think are right. And that's their decision. So I abide by that. I don't hold grudges. I don't spend my life worrying about, what could have been, and people, that's life. We all move on, and I've left behind some fantastic players. I think the only disappointment was I think it was a team that could have gone on, in all honesty, and won the Premier League eventually in the next year or two, and I think they can. I just wish I'd have been able to see that through and be part of that. We finished fourth and we were just unlucky, wasn't we, in the end? But I don't think that, you know, I still think the same outcome would have come if we'd have finished, if Chelsea hadn't won. That's the feeling I got. Even if we'd have finished fourth, I still think the chairman would have gone down the same road as he went down yesterday. So that's, as I say, that's football. You know, I've had 4 great years there, and I think all you can do is lead the club in better shape than you found it. And one thing I know I did that for sure.
The future of Rangers manager Ali McCoist appears to be in doubt today, on the same day that the club's creditors formally rejected a CVA proposal, meaning that the club will now have to be liquidated. Reports suggest McCoist will leave his job in the next 48 hours after he confronted prospective owner Charles Green about plans to oust him. Rangers' assets are now due to be sold to a new company, which will aim to continue as a football club. All 23 members of England's Euro 2012 squad have left their base in Krakow ahead of Friday's game against Sweden in Kiev. It'll be their second game in Group D, following their 1-1 draw with France on Monday. Once again, they'll be without Wayne Rooney, who serves the second game of his 2-match ban. Thankfully for England supporters, there appear to be no new injury concerns for Roy Hodgson. Elsewhere, Germany need only a point from their final Group B match against Denmark to reach the quarter-finals. Mario Gomez scored twice as Germany beat the Netherlands 2-1. The Dutch will now need to beat Portugal to have any chance of progressing. Portugal kept their hopes alive last night with a dramatic 3-2 win over Denmark, the winner coming 3 minutes from time, courtesy of substitute Silvestre Varela. Now, tonight's games, they're in Group C at 5 o'clock on BBC One. It's Italy versus Croatia in Poznan, and that's followed by the Republic of Ireland against Spain in Gdansk. There's commentary of that on Radio 5 Live. Ireland desperately need a win, having lost 3-1 to Croatia on Sunday. Owen Farrell has been dropped from England's rugby union team after last weekend's defeat to South Africa in Durban. Farrell is replaced at fly half by Toby Flood for this Saturday's second test in Johannesburg. Head coach Stuart Lancaster says he feels Farrell can still make a significant impact from the bench. Jonathan Joseph will make his first England start. The 7-time Tour de France winner Lance Armstrong is facing new doping accusations. The US anti-doping agency has written to Armstrong to notify him of the allegations. He's accused the agency of carrying out a vendetta against him. He insists the allegations are baseless and says he's taken and passed 500 drugs tests. The traditional pre-Wimbledon tournament at Queen's Club continues this afternoon, but without Andy Murray. After losing to Nicholas Mayhew in 3 sets, the British #1 says he'll need to arrange some exhibition matches. He admitted he struggled to make the switch from clay to grass. No fewer than 8 seeds were knocked out of the competition yesterday. And that's all the sport from me for now. I'll have more for you later on.
Thanks, Jenny. See you in the next hour. Leveson allowing, we hope. Let's catch up, very importantly, with the weather prospects. Peter Gibbs is here. Peter, I didn't have to use my umbrella today. What's going on?
Well, it's all going downhill again, Jane, I'm afraid to say. The hosepipe bans may have been coming off, but nobody's told the weather. I'll show you a picture. And it's not a pretty one. We've got this area of rain pushing in from the southwest, just getting into Cornwall at the moment, and it'll continue its way northwards and eastwards through the rest of today. So let's move into the forecast sequence. Still a bit of sunshine ahead of all this cloud and rain, here and there across the North Midlands. Some parts of Scotland as well, not faring too badly. But I think by the end of the afternoon, that rain will be across much of Wales and southwest England. And not too long after that, heading towards the London area to bring a cessation of play, I think, at Queen's later on. Temperatures, so in the brighter spots, not too bad, up into the high teens. But as this wind starts to pick up, that'll be a real feature of the weather through this evening and tonight across southern and western parts of the UK. The rain gets heavier as it works its way in as well. And there is a risk, perhaps, of some flooding across some parts of Wales, southwest England and the eastern side of Northern Ireland, where the rain will be relentless later on this night and accompanied by those brisk easterly winds. A pretty unpleasant day for most of us tomorrow. The unsettled weather set to continue right into the weekend as well.
Peter, thanks very much. Well, we're going straight back inside Court 73 and David Cameron resumes.
Obviously, Nay Murdoch. How long have you known her?
I suppose since they got married, but I can't put a date on it.
The first meeting here with Rupert Murdoch is the 18th of January 2006. As your witness statement makes clear, there was an earlier encounter in October 2005 before you were leader. Can I ask you please about the 1st of February 06? Paul Dacre, Daily Mail drinks. It's unfair to ask you on one particular occasion, which was 6 years ago, but do you think that was a one-on-one, as it were, or were the people there?
I don't remember, because it was a long time ago, but of the meetings I've had with Paul Dacre, I would say most of them have probably been a one-on-one drink, occasionally a lunch. He has done some where there have been a range of journalists from the Daily Mail. I remember one or two of those. So a mixture, but I think some one-on-ones, yes.
And if one were to look at one other with Mr. Dacre, the 18th of December 06, which is page 04205, it's a dinner actually. It's about the time that the Information Commissioner's second report came out. Again, I understand it's difficult to search one's recollection, but do you recall whether that report might have been discussed then or not?
I don't recall that, I'm afraid. Okay. I can't even remember where the dinner was. I mean, I think also I've had dinner in my home as well, so I've the trouble with that one. I can't remember where it was, let alone what we talked about.
And then the Santorini visit at page 04220. Can I just understand whose idea was that?
I think it was Matthew Freud's idea. I think he phoned me about it. So I think it was his idea, yes.
Did he have a discussion with Rebecca Wade about it, to your knowledge?
I don't know, no.
Do you know why that visit came about, or what its purpose was?
Well, from my point of view, it was just an opportunity to try to get to know Rupert Murdoch better. Obviously, I was trying to win over his newspapers and put across my opinion. And so for me, it was just an opportunity to try and build that relationship. It was, quite a long way to go and all of that, but it seemed a good opportunity.
So presumably there was an earlier conversation, or there had been earlier conversations with Mr. Freud as to the possibility of having this sort of meeting. Is that correct?
Well, my memory is it came together quite quickly. I seem to remember I was on some tour day around the country. I got a call or a text from Matthew. I was just about to go off to Georgia to visit Georgia at the time of the Russian invasion, and it just seemed like a possible opportunity to link up. But I seem to remember it all came together very quickly at the last minute. But I might have got it wrong.
Well, we know that Rebecca Wade was there, but did you have a conversation with her about this before you flew out, or not?
I don't recall that, I'm afraid.
Okay, now in 2009, Mr. Camoron, the 3rd of May, you had lunch with James Murdoch. This is page 04225. Yes. Do you think it's possible on that occasion that you discussed regulatory issues, including Ofcom and the BBC?
Well, I don't recall what was discussed directly at the lunch. I'm sure that over the years I've discussed some of those issues with James Murdoch. He's got very strong views on them. I've got very strong views on them. They're not really the same views. And I'm sure we would have had discussions about it. Perhaps particularly, well, I think probably on both. I don't recall the specifics, but I'm sure we must have discussed our views.
This was a few months before his McTaggart lecture, which was delivered, I think, in late August 2009. Did you have any discussions with him about the subject matter of that lecture, either before he gave it or afterwards?
Not to my memory, no. I think these would have been, as I say, most of these meetings were really about me trying to promote Conservative policy, the Conservative approach and the rest of it. But sometimes, because we're both I'm interested in media issues and have long-standing views on them, sometimes we would have, I'm sure we would have discussed them.
Well, one can see the intensity of his feeling, if I can put it in those terms, from the text of the lecture itself. He expresses himself quite strongly, doesn't he?
Yes, and there are lots of things in that lecture I don't particularly agree with. I mean, I've always believed in a strong BBC funded by the licence fee. I think Ofcom does have an important role. I think, as I've put in my evidence, Ofcom got over-bloated and over-big and needed to, like other quangos, be reduced in scale, but both have an important role.
Okay, now in September 2009, which is at page 04228. You have lunch with Mr. Dominic Moen of The Sun on the 1st of September 2009.
Mm-hmm.
Again, to alight on any particular occasion is possibly unfair. But do you think on that occasion the issue of support of The Sun for you and your party was discussed or not?
I wouldn't. I don't recall. I think by this stage, obviously, I was making arguments that Sun readers were coming over to the Conservatives, and our approach was what the country needed and all the rest of it. But I don't remember the specifics of that conversation. No.
Fair to you, so that we see the overall picture. There are a lot of references to Nick Robinson on this page and elsewhere. He's someone that you keep in contact with for obvious reasons.
Yes, that's
Can I go to the 10th of September, though, 2009? It's described as drinks with James Murdoch. That was at the George, wasn't it?
Yes, this is the page. Are we still on 229, are we?
It's 04228, actually.
Okay. Yes.
And the evidence has been that it was on that occasion that he told you that the Sun would support the Conservative Party. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do remember that. That was. I do remember him saying that. I remember the conversation, well, some of the conversation we had. Yes.
How long was the conversation, approximately?
Not particularly long. I mean, it might have been half an hour, 40 minutes. It was a drink and a catch up, but it was. He wanted to tell me that the Sun was going to support the Conservatives, and he told me, I think from my memory, that it was going to happen around the time of the Labour conference. And I remember obviously being pleased that the Conservative Party was going to get the Sun's support. And I think we had a conversation about other, policy issues at the time. That's my memory of it.
So he gave you some inkling of the timing that this was going to bring?
I think so. That's my memory of it, yes. Perhaps not the precise timing, but I think they were probably still debating it. But I seem to remember there was sort of the hint it was going to be in sometime in Labour's conference.
Did he identify which aspects of your policy constituted the reasons for his newspapers, or in particular The Sun, wanting to support your party?
I think at the time a lot of the focus was on the economy, because obviously we were in the midst of all the economic difficulties, and we were setting out very clearly that it was important for Britain to get on top of its debt and its deficit and all the rest of it. So I do remember discussing economic issues. Yes, I think that's right.
On that occasion, do you recall any mention being made by James Murdoch of your policies in relation to the BBC and Ofcom?
I don't recall that, and I think it unlikely. I think that he was very keen, I think, to tell me directly that the Sun was going to support the Conservatives, that he felt on the big economic judgment about what Britain needed, we had the right argument, the government had the wrong argument, and my memory is that's what the conversation was about.
Yes, you said you had a conversation about other policy issues.
Yes, he's got lots of enthusiasms that aren't about the media. He's particularly enthusiastic about defence. He takes the view we should have at least 6 aircraft carriers, I think, at last count, rather than 2. So he has lots of enthusiasms, and I'm sure we'll discuss some of those. But the key, my memory is, and it's difficult to recall all of these events, I definitely remember him saying the Sun was going to support the Conservative Party. I wouldn't forget that. I think he gave me a hint of the timing. And my memory is it was mostly about the big economic picture, because that was the key issue of the day.
Well, this was within about 2 weeks of his McTaggart lecture. Had you, out of interest, read his lecture before the 10th of September 2009?
No.
Had the gist of it been drawn to your attention?
I read after it was delivered. I would have seen the press reports, but I don't remember reading the whole thing at the time. I've read it subsequently in preparation for all of this. But as I say, he had very strong views. Some of these views I didn't agree with, and on things like the BBC, we had a very clear position, which dates right back to my time at Carlton, that the BBC is the cornerstone of British broadcasting. You need to have the licence fee. And as I say, Ofcom, while bloated, it had an important role.
But just some might say that Ofcom and the BBC were bête noire of Mr. James Murdoch. He'd expressed himself very forcibly in the lecture. This is within 2 weeks of the lecture. It's more than plausible that he might have unburdened himself about those matters to you on this one occasion. Do you think that might have happened?
I don't think so, because as I say, I think the main, this was sort of, I think for the Sun it was a big change, and I remember it being about economic policy. I mean, that's my memory of it.
Okay, the 21st of September, we can see from the bottom of the page, there's dinner, you, James Murdoch and Rebecca Brooks. It's obviously a social occasion now, but can you remember anything about whether political issues, perhaps regulatory issues, were discussed on that occasion?
I don't particularly recall what was discussed then, no.
But support for the upcoming support of the Sun is likely to have been mentioned, isn't it?
Yes, I think I'm trying to remember the exact date of the Labour conference.
I think we're on to about the 27th or 28th of September.
Right. Well, I expect that would have been discussed in terms of what the Sun was going to do. It was, but I remember the drink. I remember what he said about the Sun supporting the Conservatives. I don't particularly remember the dinner.
Well, rightly or wrongly, the Sun had timed it for maximum political damage to Mr. Brown's government. It goes without saying. It seems at least plausible again that that sort of point was discussed on this occasion. Would you agree?
Well, as I say, I recall the drink. I don't recall the dinner.
Okay. Well, the announcement, I think, was the evening of the 28th of September. It might be the 29th. It's not going to matter for our purposes today. Because if you look at 04229, then a series of interactions with the Sun, an interview, George Pascoe Watson, the 1st of October, dinner, Dominic Mohan and Mr. Pascoe Watson again, the 5th of October, interview with the Sun, the 5th of October, breakfast, News of the World, the 7th of October, dinner, Owen Stelzer, The Times, the 21st of October, and then breakfast, 2nd of November, James Murdoch and Rebecca Brooks. So there's quite a lot of activity with News International in the month or so.
That's true. I would just, for anyone who's not on page 4229, point out there was also dinner with the Telegraph, meetings, interviews with Radio Manchester, Scottish Television, the BBC, ITV. This was the party conference. This was an incredibly busy media week where I was meeting all sorts of people from all sorts of different media organisations. Just want to make that point. Including Lord Rothermere, the whole team at the Mail on Sunday, etc., etc.
Yes, that's a very fair point, Mr. Cameron. I didn't mean to occlude that one. But can I move forward to the 15th of December 2009, which is the bottom of 04231? That seems to be the first meeting you had with Rupert Murdoch after the Sun's support had changed. Can you remember anything about that conversation, particularly about the change of support?
Not particularly. I mean, in most of my lunches or breakfasts with Rupert Murdoch, the conversation has always been predominantly about economic issues, security, geopolitical issues. He was very interested in what was happening in Afghanistan, very interested in global markets. I think it's, of course, all businesses have their interests and the rest of it, but in my dealings with Rupert Murdoch, most of the conversation has been about big international political issues.
The only other point on this schedule, and it's quite a small point, we see you on the 28th of January 2010 at page 04232. There's dinner, Will Lewis of the Daily Telegraph, Frederick Michel, News Corporation, James Harding, obviously The Times, Robert Peston, obviously the BBC. Was that the only occasion that you met with Mr. Michel?
This is bottom of 4232.
That's right.
This was in Davos, I think. And this is a sort of dinner I've held pretty much every year I've been going, and I think this is what it refers to. I definitely met Fred Michel there. I think I've also probably met him at some of the News International parties. But I think that's probably about it.
And of course, you're aware of his role, and
I've read a lot of texts. Yes. Well, I have now, as it were.
In relation to your schedule when you're Prime Minister, this is now DC1, it starts at 04182. What we see, by way of summary, is a lesser degree of contact. It's about 50%,
yeah.
we think. And the same sort of picture in terms of the individuals you meet coming up. So yes. I don't think it's necessary to look at this with any care, unless there are any particular points you want to draw attention to.
No. I just make the point, I suppose, that again, if you look at arrival in Downing Street, there are meetings with a lot of different newspapers and newspaper groups. But as you say, a less intense period. I had other important things to do.
I'll ask you, moving away from this and towards someone else, Mr. Aidan Barclay.
Yes.
We've heard some evidence from him, and I hope you've had the chance to look at the transcript of his evidence under tab 27 of this bundle. But he referred to the fact that he had quite frequent text messages with you. You've exchanged phone numbers, and we've seen evidence of some of those messages. It's the transcript for day 62, in particular, is in the afternoon, pages 83 to 87.
Yeah. Yes.
We know from one text message, I mean, some of these are of a personal nature, it's therefore not necessary to look at them, Mr. Cameron, but there's one message at the start of tab 25, which is page PROP, and then 03106.
Right.
Where there's a reference to him. I'm just trying to be sure who the pronoun him is a reference to in that. I think it's.
So are we on the text themselves or on the? Oh, here we are. We got it on the screen.
This is an SMS text sent by Davies, obviously Mr. Barclay, to you, 23rd of March 2010. So the campaign hasn't yet been launched, but it's about to be. Spoken to Tony, that's Tony Gallagher, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
And repeated our conversation, asked him to be in touch to arrange daily call during campaign as discussed. And I think the evidence was that the daily call was going to be between you and Mr. Barclay, but if that's wrong, I'll be corrected.
I don't think so. I think the daily call was between the Conservative Party and Tony Gallagher. I don't know whether it was necessarily going to be me, but I think this was me wanting to make sure that the Telegraph knew that our policies and our plans and all the rest of it. I think that's what it was about.
I understand. Now, as I said, some of the texts are about social arrangements, but there are some texts about liquidity. But this is much later on, in May 2011. Just to have a look at one of them, it's at 03112, Mr. Cameron.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, this is quite a recondite area. Suggests, therefore, Bank of England announce extension to liquidity scheme, allow banks, say, 5 years to implement Basel III. If you can scrap talk of bank tax, other countries won't go along with it anyway. I think you do reply to that, or maybe you don't. But there's another one about credit markets. Is the overall impression here that he has access to you in a particular way?
Well, I think we'd met various times. We had each other's phone numbers. I think he felt particularly strongly about some of these economic issues and wanted to give me his view. I don't think there's anything particularly improper about that.
No. But did you, put another way, did you accord any particular weight to his view, or is it just part of the whole range of viewpoints you receive probably on a multitudinous basis over the course of a working
yes, I think
day.
this was the view of him, you know, not really as chairman of a newspaper group, but as chairman of a big business heavily invested into the UK, lots of property and other businesses, and this was his strong views about the financial situation, and I think it's perfectly legitimate. I get a lot of exposure to businesses' views on these sorts of points, some by text, many more by the meetings I have, and that seems to me not a bad thing, as long as you can order them properly in your mind.
So in order to get a fair picture, are we to understand that you are almost bombarded with this sort of material, not necessarily from media sources, but generally people trying to get you to look at things, to at least consider them as part of policy formulation?
I wouldn't say bombarded, but you get you have a lot of contacts from a lot of different people in different ways. So I've actually sort of slightly moved away from email in some ways, because I do my official papers and box and everything very formally. But I do get texts from business contacts, friends, and what have you.
Now I go back to the issue now of the Sun newspaper. We I think agree that it can't be seen as of massive importance, but it is of some importance.
Yeah.
Where it goes, as I suppose a form of floating voter. Is that a reasonable characterisation?
I think that's right. It certainly doesn't mean you're going to win the election, but no. We're trying to win support, build momentum, so it's that.
Did you develop a strategy as to how the Sun might be won over?
I wouldn't put it like that. No, I think we developed a strategy of how to explain the values and the policies and the approaches we believed in, and then tried to spread that as far as we could. Obviously, when you're talking to the Sun, you want to talk to things, those parts of your policy that are particularly going to appeal to Sun readers. So the freeze in the council tax we thought was particularly important, because people were hard-pressed, they're having a difficult time. That is something that people really can feel strongly about, because they know the pressure their family finances are under. So obviously, when you're talking to the Financial Times, you're going to be talking about Basel III, but if you're talking to the Sun, you want to talk about the policies you have that directly appeal to their readers.
By this stage, you, of course, had Mr. Coulson on board, didn't you, since May or June 2007, and I'll come to this in more detail later. You had developed a friendship with Mrs. Brooks, hadn't you?
Yes.
And you were aware that Mr. Rupert Murdoch had a good personal relationship with Mr. Brown, were you?
Yes.
And was it explained to you, or did you work it out anyway, that that was likely to be an impediment, if I can put it in those terms, to the Sun shifting sides?
I think both that, Rupert Murdoch had a strong relationship with Gordon Brown. Rebecca Wade, as then was, had a strong relationship with Gordon Brown. I knew that we had our work cut out to win over the Sun, yes. But I felt what we had on our side was that Sun readers were leaving the government and coming towards us. And so I thought, as I said right throughout, our task was to try to get what I see as a sort of centre-right, pro-enterprise, pro-family, small C conservative paper back into the fold.
And was it your understanding that the final decision would be made by Rupert Murdoch, or at the very least it couldn't be made without his assent?
I didn't really know how these decisions... I assumed, obviously, he would have a big say in it, but I sensed that if we could show that Sun readers were moving in a conservative direction, we would have a good effort, a good chance of winning their support. But as I say, this was one of many things we're trying to do.
Did Mr. Coulson give you advice as to how best to proceed in relation to the Sun?
Well, of course, he was my Director of Communications, and so he was in charge of taking our policies and working out the best way of promoting my leadership, our policies, our values, what we could do for the country to all of these media outlets.
And you knew, of course, that he was very friendly with Mrs. Brooks, didn't you?
Yes.
Now, you said Mrs. Brooks was close to Gordon Brown. Wouldn't it be perhaps fairer to say that she was close to his wife, but in fact she was very friendly with Tony Blair and less well disposed to Gordon Brown. I can summarise it.
I think she was pretty friendly with all of them. I remember some strong arguments when I would be berating the government and all its works, and she would be standing up pretty vigorously for Gordon Brown.
When did you sense that Mrs. Brooks would be disposed to supporting you and your party? Approximately when?
I can't really put a date on it. I think it was, as I say, there was a growing picture of disenchantment with the government. The Conservative Party was, I think, getting its act together, looking more like a credible government, and it was a process. We had some strong allies, as it were. I mean, I don't want to ruin his career, but someone like Trevor Kavanagh on the Sun, I felt that he was, someone who thought that Labour government was getting it wrong, thought the Conservative Party was getting its act together. Lots of things he didn't agree with about what I was doing, but I always felt he was a potential ally for pointing out that Sun readers were moving in our direction.
I'm sure it's a process, not an event. In any event, it is an event. You're not going to remember the exact date, but approximately when do you think Mrs. Brooks was on side? About 6 months before the shift of support, a year before?
I can't. I would have to go through my diary and try and remember but I can't give you a date.
Not even a sense of when it might have been in terms of... I'm not asking you to give us a date, but was it months, was it weeks, was it years?
I don't want to get it wrong, so I mean, it certainly wasn't weeks. It was, I think, more than that. But I can't really give you any more than that.
Were you given any advice as to the importance of James Murdoch in this decision, that he would have influence over his father and, put bluntly, maybe able to draw his father away from Gordon Brown?
Well, I think they were all important. I mean, I didn't quite understand. It's like the Sun likened it onto the white smoke coming out after a sort of papal election. I didn't quite understand how the decision would be made, but my view was they were all important in terms of making that decision. The Sun readers, trusted voices like Trevor Kavanagh, Rupert Murdoch, James Murdoch, Rebecca Wade, Dominic Mohan, all of them. And I felt I had to focus on showing how the Conservative Party would be good for the country, good for Sun readers, and we had a chance of, as I say, winning them back to the Conservative fold, and that's what I focused on. A lot of these people have very strong views, and so you have pretty robust debates about some things.
So although the point may never have been explicitly made, wasn't it on occasion obvious to you what the conditions for their support amounted to?
I think one can overdo this. I think in the end, a lot of these newspapers follow their readers' views. When I felt what I was trying to do, and I think I say this in my evidence, was I was trying to win back to the Conservative cause newspapers that had been Conservative and had been won over by Tony Blair. And so I wasn't asking them to sign up to a whole set of views that they thought were completely ridiculous. I was just trying to get them to return to the right cause, as it were. And of course, you have very robust conversations about policy areas where you don't agree.
In the example you've given, the Sun newspaper was won over to Mr. Blair, and therefore the preponderance of their readers' views were convergent with New Labour. So
at that stage, yes, I think that's my point. Is that at the end of towards 1997, the Conservative government obviously had fallen massively out of favour. Sun readers were anyway switching to Labour, and their decision, while a big blow for the Conservatives, you can see a sort of natural. That was what was happening. And I think under my leadership of the Conservative Party, steadily Sun readers were coming over to the party. But also I think progressively realise over 2006, 2007 that it's very difficult if you're running a political party and you're trying to win over the public, you're trying to create momentum. It's quite difficult if you don't have what I would call sort of the different bits of the Conservative family behind you. You need your MPs supporting you, you need your MEPs, you need your councillors, your members, and you also need those parts of the Conservative press that should be sort of getting behind you. And I had this situation where some quite conservative parts of the press, I just wasn't really getting much backing from them, and I was fine. Frankly, I think I was sort of struggling a bit to get some of the message across. So I put in. I think I've put in a lot of work already, but maybe I've put in some more work.
Your exhibit DC2, Mr. Cameron, which is under tab 3 of this bundle, this collects together the meetings you've had with media figures as leader of the opposition. You're not putting it forward as a certificate in the sense that you can't guarantee that every single meeting is here, and we understand. We understand that. For what it's worth, over 4 years and 5 months of opposition, we've counted 1,404 entries, which equates to around 26 meetings or interviews per month, which is more than
the Conservative Party. And I felt, in talking to a lot of Sun journalists, a lot of them were very keen for their newspaper to change its stance because they felt they were out of tune with their readers. So I think one can overdo the whole. Also, I'm not. No way does winning the support of this newspaper or that newspaper guarantee you an election victory. Their circulations, if anything, are getting smaller.
Well, I think we can all agree that the point has been, its importance has been over-exaggerated, but there's still some degree of significance to be attached, in particular to the Sun's support. I think we can agree on that issue. Can I go back to 2005, Mr. Cameron? Of course, you started as leader of the opposition, I think, in December of that year, if my memory is right. Was your strategy then, as your then press secretary George Eustace has said, to create distance between yourself and Mr. Murdoch?
I wouldn't put it like that. I mean, I'd won the leadership of the Conservative Party without the support of, I think, any newspapers, frankly. I had a pretty rocky time with them during the leadership election, and I think I'd won the leadership basically through what I'd said at Conservative Party conference, and it was television that had helped me to get my message across. I wanted us to have a good relationship with newspapers. I knew we needed to win over more support, but to start with, there were certainly some in my office who were very keen on trying to do things completely differently and communicate much more through the internet and what have you. I would say I was more cautious about that, thinking we wanted to work very hard on television, we should do what we could with the newspapers, but I think that's the way it was. It wasn't quite sort of one set of circumstances after 2005 and then another set later on.
Well, Mr. Eustace has said, and I just invite you to comment on this, that when I was his press secretary, we pursued a strategy of quietly puncturing the arrogance of both editors and proprietors and raising the status of what I term real journalism. Is that a fair analysis in your view or not?
I think that the parts of it are right, in that we did want to have this. We didn't want to go down the same route as everything Labour had done. We did want to have a bit more distance. But if you look at the record of the sort of meetings I was having and the rest of it, I was still, flying off to meet proprietors and trying to win people over. So I don't think it totally squares up that there was one approach that was tried and failed and then another approach. I think there's slightly more elision between the two, my reflection on it.
You also made a point that you wouldn't have flown halfway around the world, if I can put it in those terms, to speak at News Corporation's annual conference. Would that have been an accurate assessment of your thinking in 2005?
Well, I certainly wasn't invited, but I mean, I was checking the record, actually, for this, because I saw what... George Eustace did a brilliant job working for me. I saw what he wrote. But looking at the record of the meetings I had and the amount of activity we were doing trying to win over and win support of newspapers, including, I think, actually flying off to meet the owners of the Telegraph, as I say, I don't think I would characterise it as one approach and then a different approach. I think there's slightly more similarity between the two. I think there's one other thing maybe to say, which was at the beginning of my leadership, a lot of what I was trying to do was make changes to the Conservative Party, to the policies of the party, the approach of the party. Not all of these were very popular with the Conservative press, so I had a difficulty in trying to make changes to the Conservative Party while at the same time convince the Conservative press I was doing the right thing.
But some have identified a change of tack, as it were, in around 2007, rightly or wrongly, and that flows from the fact that you didn't have widespread support in the media. It's fair to say in paragraph 196 of your statement that you say you didn't have widespread support at the time you became leader of the opposition.
Yes, yes.
But that may have continued until about 2007. Is that a reasonable analysis?
Yes, I think it is. I mean, some of that, as I say, was because I was making these changes to the Conservative